So I would like to welcome you to the second panel. In the first one, as you've seen, we focused mostly on the overall situation, on the market, on the overall situation of the literary translators, and now we can, so to speak, zoom in a little bit and narrow our attention a little bit, focus on some more specific topics, and namely on the contract that we all know it can be a pain to negotiate. So let's present some strategies we can employ to improve our situation. So our first speaker is the renowned translator from Finnish, Michal Švec. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. I will just put my presentation on. So my paper is called Contract Negotiation with Publishers, subtitled Challenges, Limits and Strategies. My colleagues from Iceland and Norway will talk about real existing contracts, as I understand, and that's maybe a dream of Czech translators or a best practice we could follow. We don't have such a thing here, as my Czech colleagues know, and so the negotiations with publishers is always quite time demanding, and it's like repeats all the time that each new contract you have to negotiate from the scratch. So we all know what a license agreement is, that it's a contract between publisher and translator, and often a sign of equation is put in the middle. Publisher equates translator in the terms of the contract, in the terms of the law. Of course it does, but what does it mean in reality? Publishers are very often the stronger side of the agreement, and the practice is that Czech translators are usually given a ready-made contract by a publisher, and they are just sign it or negotiate some terms of the agreement. But it's not really that the translator is offering his or her own contract. That's sometimes may work with some publishers, but it's not really a usual practice. Some of our colleagues negotiate, some of us don't. As you see the results of the questionnaire, of the survey, that it was maybe quite alarming how many translators do not negotiate about a fee, for example. They just sign what they are offered, and that's a practice that should be changed. And I will talk in my paper about the role of the professional organizations. How can we help to make this practice more smooth, and how can we help to negotiate contracts that are beneficial for the translators and not only for publishers. First of all, the role of professional translators organization is educating translators and in many fields, of course, authorship law, and also negotiation and these soft skills that are necessary for being a good negotiator. And there is a very crucial role of professional organizations, because translators are usually educated at the universities in language, in culture. They know some translation theory, but when they come to the real world of business, they have mostly like no soft skills to use when it comes to negotiation of contracts. So there is a very important role of professional organizations. The next one is sharing best practices among members. If the members meet on regular basis, even if it's over a Pilsen beer in the Czech Republic, as it's very usual here, you can share what contract you have, what terms you have, what are the practices of what publisher, and you can share also your negotiation strategies. And this is the big benefit of being a member of a translator organization. The next big role of translator organization, which is now coming, it was not useful a few years ago, it's consultation service, that the organizations are cooperating closely with lawyers, and they can provide the service either of a lawyer or some skilled members who know a lot about authorship law, for example. So they can, such parts of contracts, some clauses can be consulted. And when it comes to unpleasant situation that the law is broken by a publisher, or somehow the book is published without license agreement and so on, then there is a strong role of a translation organization who can help with the help of a lawyer to negotiate further. The code of conduct, it's something we were discussing a lot in the translations of the North, especially because as we know, we are all individuals and we have different views on our profession, so it's nice to have some common ground and to know how to behave and what is ethical in our profession, what is not, and this has to be done through communication among members. It can't be like set from above, but it has to come from a discussion. So we discussed quite longly our code of conduct or ethical code, and now we have certain rules we'd like to follow in our organization. That is also good for the publisher to see that these translators who are members of such an organization, they bounded somehow themselves to follow these rules in the code of conduct, and that's a good thing. And the last thing where can be the role of professional translators organization is a general negotiation. Of course, the role is not to negotiate the contract on behalf of the translator. We have agencies who do this. If translator is interested, they can hire an agency who is negotiating on behalf, but the translation organization cannot, according to law, even cannot negotiate on behalf of the translator, but can focus on such an opening general questions, topics, concerns, and somehow steering the discussion with the publishers. And that's what we are trying to do in the past few months, not years really, but months, within this project and other activities of our three biggest organizations of translators. There are, of course, preconditions of negotiations, and if they are met, stronger they are, more successful negotiations could be. And what are these preconditions? The first and maybe the most important is to have a strong professional organizations. If we don't have them, then the negotiation on behalf of the organization is really weak. And by strong professional organization, I mean a large membership base. So far, we don't really have large membership base in the guild. We have quite a large membership base in Czech Translators of the North. More than half of all translators translating from Nordic languages, fiction literature, are a member of Translators of the North. But it's just a segment of the market. So we need also the guild to be strong, and we hope it's coming there. But the change has just started in recently. Strong organization is known and respected by translators, by the translator community, by publishers, by general public, by professionals, and so on. And it takes a lot of time, many years to achieve this, but it could be, or it should be, one of the main goals of each organization. Educated translators and negotiators, I already mentioned within the previous slide, as well as common ground. When it comes to common ground, it's not just the code of conduct, but it's also knowing the goals of the translators. If we are negotiating on behalf of the translators, of course we need their mandate, and we need to know what they need the organization to negotiate about. So it needs a lot of discussion, pre-discussion, before the negotiation really starts, discussion among members within the membership base. What is our common ground? What do we want to achieve in negotiations? Will to negotiate, it comes to motivation of both parties, meaning publishers and the translators. Without motivation, there will be no negotiation, or it will lead to no real benefits. So we need to raise awareness on benefits for translators, and also enhance the discussion among publishers. What are the benefits for them? Why they should even discuss with us, because they have their contracts, and many translators just sign them as they are. So why they should be even negotiating? But there are truly a lot of benefits for both sides. So. And then it comes to systematic and strategic approach. Negotiation, it's not just one meeting of some people with some people, but if the negotiation is, it is only successful if it's well prepared and it's strategically prepared. And it's a long process. It deserves a lot of time, a lot of sessions, a lot of meetings, and all these meetings should be well prepared. Otherwise, it can lead to nothing and no agreement. That's why we initiated, I would say first time in the history of Czech literary translators, a meeting with publishers called Round Tables. This is a picture from February when we organized our first round table with publishers. As you can see, the table is not really round, but that happens. And we translators have a wide imagination, so you can imagine sitting in Camelot in the festive halls and negotiating. But that's not the point, you know, the round table as a term. So we invited publishers to the first of the series of meetings, here are just some remarks. I would like to call it the best practice to share, but as we have just started, it's not really something I should call best practice. Is just a food for thoughts and one way how it could be done, and maybe in a few years I could present it as a good practice, best practice, but so far we are just in the beginning. Selection of participants is crucial. We selected 10 participants, or actually 12 at the end. There was from translators representing all 3 translator organizations in the Czech Republic, and then we invited publishers. That was more tricky because there is a number of publishing houses in the Czech Republic, quite a large number. So we just started from the biggest ones. We invited those really big players on the market and those who accepted the invitation. Luckily, both like those 2 really huge publishing houses, Euromedia and Albatros Media, accepted the invitation, so they had one person each. Then preparatory meetings, translators held preparatory meetings, exchange opinions, and shaped the agenda. That was quite important, not just to meet on the spot, but meet before. And 10 people is quite a lot, so we needed to unite the thoughts and ideas. And then, of course, both parties were invited to send items, ideas for agenda. So the agenda consisted of ideas from publishers and from translators as well. And we had 2 facilitators. It's also crucial to have people who know how to lead a meeting. When you have 20 people meeting in one room and no moderator, that would lead to nothing, I would say. So we had 2. One of them was me. That's why I'm speaking here right now, representing translators. And then we have one facilitator representing publishers, because we wanted to the facilitators to be as equal as possible. So there were 2 of us, and both like parties were feeling maybe comfortable that they have also the moderator from their side. And we as the facilitators held also preparatory meetings several before it starts. The focus of the first roundtable that was held in February 2022 was mostly get to know each other. We didn't have really like big goals that we want to achieve in a 2-hour discussion, change of the contract. That's not possible. We just take it strategically, step by step. So getting to know each other, translators, publishers, because the publishers were represented often by directors or like the people you don't really meet when you are negotiating contract with the law department. You don't meet the director who is in charge of the contract, which is a bit tricky, but at the round table you could. We were finding out the motivation to negotiate of both sides, and we were defining negotiable topics, like what we can actually talk about, what are the topics that are important for you, what are the priorities of both sides. And what we did also is a common interest reconnaissance. This is from the facilitation or mediation theory, the famous iceberg model, that you know that what a party is saying is just position, but what you need to find is a common interest that are deep below. And this can be done only through a dialogue and discussion. You can't know it from the emails when you are negotiating about a contract. So that was one of the very important moment of the roundtable. The roundtable number 2 should be held in May this year, and what we are going to discuss are license agreement details. So we will go like one by one the arrangements in the agreement, as scope of license, fees, and their payments, and bestseller clause and other issues which are in the contract, and that would be pointed out before at the preparatory meetings. We'll just focus on a few, because as well we'll have like 2 hours discussion, so there's no time to discuss everything what is in the contract, but something that is negotiable and we could find an agreement. to sum my presentation up, the subtitle was Challenges, Limits and Strategies. So what are the challenges of contract negotiations that are done by the translator organization on behalf of the translators? It's of course motivation of negotiating parties, unity of translators. That's something we are struggling with. We don't have a large membership basis, so like I would say 5 to 10% of literary translators are members of translator organizations, which is not very many. So we have to think about how to involve also the others in the discussion. And of course, we need to unite our opinions and what do we want to achieve, what do we want to negotiate. So that's one of the challenge. And the other challenge on the other side is plurality of publishers, which is great for bibliodiversity of a Czech market, that we have so many publishers, but it's a challenge for negotiating, because who you are really negotiating with? Is it this publisher? Is it that publisher? There is an association of publishers, but not all the publishers are members of these associations, and the association itself has no mandate to negotiate on behalf of their members. So it's a bit tricky, and we have to think about how to approach the publishers and how can we actually negotiate. What are the limits? Of course, capacities, because translators, even those who are working for associations, are not employees of the organization, so they work in their free time. There are financial limits and human resource limits, because the translators community is not that big, and we need to do our work to earn money, so we can't only be negotiating on behalf of the translators. The Czech book market was also mentioned during the previous discussion. It's quite limited and quite like overwhelmed by books. There is around 17,000 titles published every year. Out of them, I would say 3,000 or 4,000 are translated books. And the market, it's just for 10 million of people, plus Slovakia, we can count them in. So it's like 15 million, and it really, if you publish a book, there is a real small chance that it will pay off. So the market is as it is, and we should be aware of it as a limit also for negotiation. And then the Czech law and the question of trade unions or labor unions was raised here. According to Czech law, the translator associations that are not trade union, labor unions, they can't really make any, they can negotiate on general topics, of course, but they can't really offer or like make some conditions to be followed by their members. It's forbidden by law. So we have to bear this in mind and communicate with lawyers very well, what can actually we do and what can't we do. So that's a question of labor union. And just the last remark, strategies, what should we do? Right now it's building up strong professional organization. That takes time, but we've started, so I hope we will have in a few years quite strong professional organizations. Educate translators, and then what would be very nice to achieve is a regular dialogue with translators and publishers, because as I said, like meetings about the contract or whatever, it's a process. It's not like one event. So if we set up regular meetings, it could be like on a yearly basis. It doesn't have to be necessarily every week. Nobody has time for that. But if it's like one a year, talking about the stuff that matters, that would be great. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michal. Thank you very much for your paper. And we'll open for questions later, unless somebody has a very pressing topic they want to address right now. And the next up, okay, can we help with any technical difficulties? Well, I certainly cannot help with any technical difficulties, but maybe Martin. Okay. Yeah, I definitely cannot help with any technical difficulties, but if you want me to cause them, I can help.
It's probably easier. Am I on? No. No. Yep. No, I could start by introducing myself. I'm Hilde Lyng. I'm the chairperson of the Norwegian Association of... Oh, it's not on.
It's not?
It is on? Okay.
Yep.
was just bad microphone use. So, well, I'm Hilde Lyng, and I'm the chairperson of the Norwegian Association of Literary Translators. And I'm going to talk about our standard agreement. And my question is it a unicorn? But first, a bit about the Norwegian Association of Translators. We organize about 40 members of almost all ages. The youngest is I think 30, and the oldest is 99. And so the oldest one is obviously not an active member or an active translator, but he has until recently been an active member. And there are some things I want to clarify before starting, is that in Norway we have an exemption from the competition legislation that allows us as an organization to enter negotiations with the publishers. Us as an organization, or two organizations, because we cooperate with the Norwegian Association of Non-Fiction Writers and Translators. That was right, isn't it? Yeah, good. So, on to the unicorn question. That's the one, yeah. Because, yeah, unicorns are actually real. They do exist. However, there aren't that many of them. There might be 2 or 3. I know of 2. One in Iceland and one in Norway. And they're very sensitive creatures. They require a lot of care and attention. And they need to be pampered, and you always have to look good, well after them, because they're really, really demanding. And in our neighboring countries, Denmark and Sweden, there aren't any unicorns left. They're extinct. Until recently, Sweden had one. Before that, Denmark also had one, but not anymore. So we are really, 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 we really aim to take good care of the unicorn that we have. And they're really, because they're hard to bear forth. They're hard to rear. And our organization, which was established in 1948, did not have a standard contract until 1972. So it actually took us 24 years to get a standard contract. So it also requires hard work and a lot of diligence. So, and here's a family photo of the 7 generations we have so far. So the 1972 contract is the sort of, I think it's the great grandmother of the present contract. But I am going to focus on the present one, the fall, and its mother, the queen of contracts, as I'd like to call it. Right. Whoops. Because in 1998, the agreement was terminated by NFFO and NO, the 2 organizations, because we did not think that the contracts were up to date. Because they treated translations as commodities, not as the products of highly specialized labor, as it actually is. And as you can see here, oh, sorry, that was a bit quick there. There was this is a comparison between the average wage and the translator's fee. In 1991, a translator needed to translate 1,056 pages to earn what was at the time the average wage. Whereas in 2006, the same translator had to translate 1,723 pages. So that's 63.16% more per annum, which is quite considerable. And this was partly due to the fact that the contract was linked to the consumer price index. and not to the wage index. So that was one of the main points in the negotiations at the time, or the non-negotiations, because after the organizations terminated the contract, it took us 7 years to get the publishers to the negotiating table. And they were really, really reluctant to change anything in the contract. They were quite happy about the old contract, whereas we weren't. So what the Norwegian translators did at the time, and this is a source for inspiration, I would say, the translators went on strike. And you may ask yourself, can a freelance worker go on strike? No, not really. We can't go on strike because we're not employed. But what we did was sort of, work to rule. We set down a committee comprising of members from the two organizations, and then they scrutinized the contract for weak points in the contract that we already had, and they found a very good weak point. And in the contract it said, the translation is going to be handed in as an easily readable typewritten manuscript ready to print. And that's exactly what we did. Instead of handing in our manuscripts by email or digitally or on diskettes or whatever, our organization organized so that they were all printed out on paper. Printed out, as you can see on in the picture here, these are parcels for publishers. And the people sitting there are translators sitting outside the offices of two of the biggest publishers in Norway. And they were typewriting letters that were to sort of follow these parcels of translations. And they were then cycled around town with, like, in an old-fashioned way, and delivered to the publishers. And this was in the sort of strike started in April, and by August, the publishers had received about 200 manuscripts like this. And so that means that they had to scan the manuscript, but the manuscripts were sort of manipulated so that it would be hard to scan them. And most editors at the time used to sort of make notes in the manuscripts, etc. And the manuscripts were to be proofread, etc. So it was really a hindrance for the publishers. And but the publisher, they didn't budge. But we continued on. And the translators are crying, it says on one of the boards. So a group of translators went around to literary festivals. The first picture is from one of the biggest parties for one of the biggest publishing houses has a big party every summer. And the translators were standing outside with their boards and sandwich boards, etc. And some of the point was not to whinge, just to have a lot of humor and be funny and interesting and say things like, "Oh, the translators are crying. We're sort of starving to death." And some board said, "Recent research has shown that translators need more money now." Or, "You are drinking the blood, sweat and tears of translators. What's on your plate?" So it was very much sort of cheeky and tongue-in-cheek. And they even made, I'm doing this wrong all the time, made sort of publisher Pokemon cards with with quotations from publishers, what they said during the sort of, not the negotiation, but what they said in the press. And as you can see, well, you don't see the most of them were like this one, which was nothing. And this was part of a sort of a small internet game. And we sort of won this worked. It actually worked. It worked to sort of have a campaign with a sense of humor, and of course, the manuscripts that they couldn't easily access. And as you can, I've written it here that we wanted the sort of the fee to be adjusted according to the wage index, and we got that. And we also got some quite exceptional fees for additional use, which was 25% of the index basic fees. That would be the fee that you get for the translation as a whole. For electronic versions, 15% of the index fee, but there's no license or there's no royalty in this. There's just a lump sum. But I believe that this is probably one of the best translator contracts that has ever existed. And it does not exist anymore. So, well, it does sort of, but it's retired. It can still come into use. If you have signed this, you can actually use this. So then back to the present contract. I realized I had to sort of put in a bit of the standard contract for dummies, because these are the sort of main features in the contract. It is obligatory for members of the Publishers Association and the Translators Associations. That is the Literary Translators Associations. It only applies to literary works. And the Publishers Association comprises about 100 publishers. But it is also used by most other publishers. And the fee is fixed, but it has sort of room for negotiations for more difficult texts. It does not happen very often that you get more than the basic fee. And some people also get less, I must say. But that's not very common. And at present, it is about 23 euros per 1,000 characters, including spaces. But that is, it does not have a license agreement attached to it. There's no royalty, so that's all you actually get for the translation. But the contract, the period of the contract is 5 years. So after that, other provisions come into effect. And there is royalty for other formats like e-books and audiobooks. And you can enter the contract with paper book as the primary use, or audiobook as the primary use, or the e-book as the primary use. And then the other uses will be, or the other formats will be secondary formats. And there will be different provisions applying to them. And it can be prolonged, as I said. Oops. I'm so bad at this. And then 1/3 of the fee is paid when the contract is signed, and the publisher is not allowed to publish the book until they've paid you everything there. They have, the whole fee. And the fee is, as I said, is indexed as a wage, not according to the consumer price index. And more importantly, in the last contract, we also got in the agreement that it should be paid out as a wage, not as sort of a freelance fee, which means that we will get almost the same social security as an ordinary wage earner, which is really a good thing. So this is a more detailed glimpse. As you can see, the publisher is getting the exclusive right to one of the primary uses, and then to other uses. And this is in the contract. It's written like this. You get the specified fee, which is 23 euros. for the transference of the right for 5 years. And then you can choose to use the other formats to publish the other formats for an additional fee. And this is dependent on what was the first format. If the first was printed edition, let's see, yeah. If the first format was ebook, you will get 2.5% of the index basic fee for printed editions. If the primary use was an audiobook, you will get 5% of the index basic fee for printed editions, etc. So it's and in all instances, the translator shall receive a 5% of the index basic fee as an advanced on the sales dependent fee, which is the royalty. I'm so used to using this, you know. And then you can extend the exclusive right. In the old contract, you could sort of buy, the publisher could sort of buy the exclusive right for a new period, but this is just the prolongment of the rights. That's the new feature. And then we have this, which has turned out to be quite important. It is the relapse of rights. And if the publisher does not publish the book, or if it loses the right to the original, the rights to the translation goes back to the translator, and the translator sort of can actually negotiate with another publisher. And that we have seen recently with a big publisher that has decided to publish loads of audiobooks from other publishers' backlists. And what they actually have to do is to go to the translator and ask them, can I please use your book for an audiobook? And then the translator should say, oh yes, you could. But then you will have to pay us 50% of the basic fee in according to the normal contract. But this publisher did not know that, so they have actually published at least 50 translations without paying. We're in the middle of a sort of conflict with them at the moment. That's quite interesting. And we think this is a sort of kind of weak point in our contract, because when this contract was written, it's just 2 years ago, they weren't really aware of that. The audiobook market would expand in the way that it has so far. This was something that happened maybe once a year or twice a year, that a publisher would use another publisher's translation from the backlist. And we have this, which I think is a very good feature, especially for people who are translating contemporary and very popular books. I have sometimes seen 4 manuscripts for one book. One book I translated had a different ending from the original. In the end we got it right, but I know that in Germany the book was published with a different ending from the American original. So that's very interesting. So it's very good that we will get paid for this extra work. And this I put in after we talked about the visibility of the translator. So it is actually in our contract, as Hedda said. And they are quite good, the publishers, at naming the translators. So, and this was what I mentioned, that, oops, sorry, that the basic fee has been negotiated based on the fee being disbursed as a wage payment. So I think that's all I have about the contract. And here's another unicorn for you. And it's the Pegasus unicorn, so it's a very bookish one. And I hope this can bring hope to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hilde Lyng, for the unicorns and for quite a dose of inspiration. Thank you. I'll try not to sit on the cables again, which is hard for me. And our next speaker is from Iceland. So let me introduce Magnea Matthíasdóttir, and let's hear about the practice of the standard contract in Iceland.
I should maybe start with they are trying to kill unicorns in Iceland. We are negotiating with the publishers at this time, and there are certain features that they really want to get rid of, like indexation of wages and other stuff. But to begin with, I thought as you are all translators here, or upcoming translators, in the case of the younger generation then, you probably get the question, what does this word mean? Can you translate this word for me? And you probably all answer, in what context? So I thought I would start with some context and tell you a bit about Iceland. As of January 1st this year, the total population in Iceland was a bit over 376,000, which is about a third of the population here in Prague, and a little under the total population in Florence in Italy. Of those, the number of people who speak Icelandic as their first language or their mother tongue is around 300,000. And we mostly live in Iceland. Nobody speaks Icelandic out in the world. So, as the native speakers are so few, Icelandic is not only considered a small language, but rather a micro language. And this means that we have been, throughout our history, can you hear me? Okay, we have been very dependent on translations. Translations have been a very important factor in our culture from the very beginning. And we have used it as in other countries to import information and knowledge and new technology and of course culture and literary works of all kinds. And we are focusing on literary works. And since there aren't that many of us, the market for Icelandic books is also small. And if we look at sales, for instance, at 2,000 or 3,000 sold copies of a printed book, that's sometimes called a bestseller. And that's Brynja mentioned the problem of organizing your work when you're an Icelandic translator, and this is part of that problem, because you simply don't get enough work to translate, if you know what I mean. But anyway, translations were about a third of all published titles last year. There were 985 titles published, both fiction and non-fiction, and in all formats, or that means printed, audio, or ebooks. And although the number of published titles vary between, annually, the number of translated titles is relatively stable, and it's about 25 to 35% of all published titles. And it's different after genres. For instance, you get more translated children books, especially for younger children, than for adults, but a good deal of translated fiction for adults is also translated. Yeah. Printed books are still the biggest part of the published number, but e-books and audiobooks are gaining ground, but those forms are mostly added later. And by that I mean the first version of a book is usually printed, and after 6 months or so it's published again as an e-book or an audiobook, or maybe both, and copies sold in that format. But since Storytel came to Iceland in 2018, its sales model has been a bone of contentions between publishers and Icelandic writers and translators, former claiming that this is simply a part of regular distribution, and the latter insisting that distribution through a streaming service to subscribers is a completely new type of publishing and a game changer. Icelandic writers have negotiated an addition to the standard contract to cover this, and negotiations between translators and publishers are ongoing. And whenever we mention Norway in those negotiations, they take a temper tantrum and run for 30 minutes or so. The standard contract is negotiated between the Icelandic Publishers Association, or FÍBUT, and the Writers' Union of Iceland. You can see, if you're interested in looking at the Icelandic translation contract, you can find it on FÍBUT's website in English translation. But on the Writers' Union's webpage, it's only in Icelandic. But the Writers' Union is basically our union too. And although there are other translators associations in Iceland, for instance, Bandalag, þýðenda and túlka, but you will hear more about that from our chairman, Guðrún, later. The Writers' Union is the only one that negotiates translation contracts with the Publishers Association. And it has been that way since the first contract was written over 40 years ago. It was around 1980. The current contract dates from 2011, and many things have changed in 11 years, among them book sales and in what format we prefer to enjoy our books. So the translation contract needs to be updated. And like I said before, we are negotiating for necessary changes, but since we don't know what we can get or what the end result will be, then we'll just look at some components of the contract as it stands now. The contract is 11 pages specifying various rights and obligations. One of our members said it's all about publishers' rights and translators' obligations, but it's not quite that bad. And the translator and the publisher, they sign it on page 1, which looks something like this. And this is, there are some items that are that feel necessary. Can you see it? It's okay. Yes, the quotes are from the contract I mentioned on the publisher's website. You can find it there. And the translation is a bit clumsy. It's because it's 11 years old, and our vocabulary has changed a bit in that period. Well, basically, the publisher acquires the right to publish 7,000 copies of the translations in all forms, and I'll remind you that 2,000 or 3,000 sold copies are a bestseller. So this basically means it's a you know, they never pay for anything else. But if he manages to sell 7,000 copies of the translation in any form, he has to pay the translator 7% of the net sales price for the rest of the copies, if more copies are sold. And I know of it's actually very famous among translators in Iceland. There is one guy who has actually gotten this 7%. And the net sales price is basically the publisher's income from the sale of the work and without VAT, without value-added tax. And for these, for the right to publish these 7,000 copies, the publisher pays the translator a fee after 4 categories. And they are actually quite silly. You know, the definition is actually rather silly. It's not as bad in English as in Icelandic. When 4 categories is a bit much, it's actually too much. And in reality, most translators get paid after category A, which is not the lowest one, but it's still the lowest of the 3 categories. And that may be because the publisher never thinks that the translation demands substantial time and effort, or that the translator has substantial experience. And as for category C, works of indisputable value are few and far between, if there are indeed any, and I personally don't think that category is ever used. So we are trying to simplify this criteria. Category D for trial translations is actually a good idea. It's meant to guarantee that new translators get paid for the work when a publisher wants to test what they can do. Instead of translating, 10, 20 pages and not getting paid for it, they get a lower fee. And if the publisher is satisfied, then they get a regular contract. But it's not really workable because publishers never use it in that way. They may use it for somebody who translates from Icelandic into a different language. But mostly they use it for promotional text and other short texts. Even when there are experienced translators who usually get higher wages, they should say no, but they never do. And then they just get paid less. And we want to get, so even if this is a good idea to have a special category for new translators, we want to get completely rid of this because the publishers are using it to drag down our fees. These are the rates, and I try to calculate them in euros. You can see it. It's the lowest there. Category A per page. The page is 2,160 keystrokes, and keystroke is character with spaces. So the most common rate for an Icelandic translator is category A, which is 46.29 euros. I'm not really good at calculating and stuff, so you may find all kinds of mysterious things if there are numbers there. Yes. So, like I said before, the translation fees are index regulated.
Very much. What's the standard wage in Iceland so that we can compare it to how much does a teacher get per month, or just to have some reference?
Well, it's maybe easier to say. You can probably be full-time translator by translating, let's say, 3 books a year. So it depends on how thick they are, of course. And it's sad, but you know, children books they are often very difficult to translate, and they pay really low. But like I said, indexation is important, and it's really important, because before we got that, when we got it from Norway, we got the idea from the Norwegians. Before we got that, we were squabbling about rates every year, but now it says automatic. It's the translation fees they rise along with wages in Iceland. Yes. Payment is divided in three. 1/3 when the contract is signed, 1/3 when the translation is delivered, and 1/3 when the book is published. The first third is based on estimated length, and it's usually corrected when the translation has been delivered, and as the translation is usually longer than the original text, then payment number 2 is often a bit higher than the first payment. And then you have to wait until the translation is published, and that can be problematic, because sometimes the publication is postponed for many months or even a year, and that can be a long wait for the rest of your pay when you work as a contractor. And we have been trying to negotiate reasonable changes to this stipulation, but I don't know how that goes. They start crying when we talk about 3 months after you have delivered the manuscript. No, we don't have any. We can't do that. Well, along with the translation itself. The translator is obligated to read first proofs of the translation, which is basically after comments, corrections, and changes from an editor. And after that, their work is finished, unless they want to follow the translation through all the way to printing. And some do want that. And the publisher does not pay the translator extra for proofreading, not their own work at least, but he is obligated to pay extra if changes are made to the original in the translation process, and that happens more often than you may think, and it can be a bloody nuisance, I can tell you. If an author somewhere out in the world is always sending changes to the manuscript, you simply don't like him ever again. But they have to pay extra if that happens. Even but the email you get is usually, there are a few minor changes. And then the 3 first chapters have been rewritten completely. But enough about that. In addition to the monetary fee for the translation, the translator gets 15 copies of the first edition of a printed book and 5 copies for each new edition. And the same goes for an audiobook. And this is probably the best example of how old this contract actually is, because these are definitely physical copies of an audiobook. It's not, streaming is not in this, it wasn't, you know, they hadn't invented it at the time. And the printed copy is obviously the concept this whole contract is built on. And it's a nice clause, and if you don't want to keep all 15 copies of the book, then it's a good present, or you can exchange it in a bookstore, or maybe for other books from the same publisher. And speaking for myself, this stipulation has saved many a Christmas and many birthdays. And yeah, I'm probably running out of time, but there is one important thing I want to mention, and that's Article 11 in the Icelandic contract. This is a very good and necessary reminder that the translator holds the copyright of their translation, and their name should always be mentioned in sales and all promotion materials. Many people seem to think that while the original author holds the copyright of the book, the second author or the translator has no copyright, and anybody can use the work at will. And we all know that is not true. And since we don't want to sink into the translator's famous invisibility, we have to make sure we have to do this personally. We have to make sure that our name is on all our works, along with a nice little copyright symbol. Some publishers conveniently tend to forget that if we don't remind them. And yeah, that's all, folks. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Magnea. And now we have some 15-20 minutes for discussion and questions, so let's open for your questions.
Hello, my name is Helena. I would like to address a question to Hilde. Are there any changes in the contract according to which language are you translating from? Or is it the same fee for translators from all the languages?
It is the same fee. It's a flat fee. Yes. But I know that some translators who translate from sort of very difficult languages would get a slightly higher fee. And if the text is extremely difficult, you will sometimes get a slightly higher fee.
Thank you.
Can I have a question, please? So we said that the market on Iceland is quite small, but you are speaking about much higher prices, taxes we have here in the Czech Republic. So what is the magic in there? Is it supported by the government? Are there a lot of grants and funds?
It's blackmail, pure and simple. No, they want to get rid of, they want to lower our rates. They really, really desperately want to do that. But, of course we don't want to do that. I think that because we are so few, well, let's take an example. One year there were desperate phone calls all over. Do you know somebody who can translate from Portuguese? Because the one guy who did that, he was dead. So if you are translating from some language that not many other people are translating from, then you are actually in a pretty good position. But you can't really decide your own rates. You can't get past this contract. Because the thought is that this is the lowest rate that they should pay. But the translators, now the publishers, they absolutely think this is something that should never be changed, at least not upwards. But in the last 4 years or so, things have been changing because many publishers are offering lower wages, even if they are members of the Publishers Association. They bypass this contract, and many translators agree to that because we are not all in a union or an association. Many don't even know, especially the young people, they don't even know that this contract exists. So they just say yes, and they desperately want to get into this business, and that's all. That goes for young people coming out of the translation classes at the university. That they come with a translation that they want to see published, and they don't really care that much what they get paid for it. And that's a very bad start of a career. And that's one of the reasons we want to get rid of this the D-text, with trial translations.
We are facing the same problem here in the Czech Republic. You have that they think they are not translators yet, so they cannot have more money. But I'm thinking from the point of view of publishers, so it's still economically reasonable for them, or do they have to have some funds from the original?
There are funds. There are grants from the Icelandic state, and Guðrún will probably tell you more about that. From the Literary Center, and they are getting the last 2 or 3 years. They're getting repaid from the state a part of the books they publish, the cost of the books they publish. With the reasoning that this is a bit similar to film. This is vital for the culture, and so they should get the support from the state. But we don't have the same kind of system that they do in Norway, with the state obligated to buy a certain amount of books.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Can I ask a question about education? So, do you cooperate with the universities, translation studies? Do you teach the young people to be aware of all those problems?
I did. While I was teaching there, I did. I don't know about the others, but I usually took a whole lesson going through all this stuff. But I don't know what other teachers do.
Unfortunately, the situation in Norway is that there is at present no education for literary translators. What? Yeah, right. There used to be a master's that you could take, but there's nothing at the moment. There's just one for technical translators, but. So translators are basically recruited from language studies. But I have been translating. I have not translating. I've been teaching, and I did teach them about the conditions for translators when I did. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Guðrún. I'm from Iceland. I wanted to ask Hilde, and both all of you mentioned this new streaming services and with the audiobooks. Are you making any changes now with your contracts with how are you going to work with that problem of the streaming services and the changes in the book publishing?
I should have said that because the streaming service, it is included in the present contract. So we have license agreement on streaming in our contract.
Are you happy with that? Are you happy with that?
Well, I think it could always be better, and I'm not. I'm not that happy about it now, but that's what we have, and we have a contract and we have an agreement. That's something. That's better than nothing.
Yeah, other questions? Great.
Yeah, Hilde, I wanted to ask, do I remember it wrong that the wage for literary translators is somehow linked to the income of in-house senior editors?
They're not necessarily senior editors, but employees in publishing houses.
Yeah, and in what way?
It will be the same index year per year. And it also includes sort of local, what do you call, I don't know what it's called, but it's supposed to sort of reflect an average of the income.
Like you mean
index-wise. So the starting point is obviously not the same, but...
So would it be that for people here living in Prague, where the price of living is higher, then you would get more money for the same work? No.
No.
Hilde, I think that your presentation clearly showed that birthing a standard contract, so to speak, is quite a lengthy process, a painful one. So with having that in mind, is there anything that you could advise us when it comes to this, how to go about the negotiations?
Well, I wish I could go back 60, but I wish I could go back 60 or 50 years to the starting point, because obviously we have a different stand. It's totally different to sort of renegotiate. It's a different case, but it's stamina, and knowing what you want and being. Willing to compromise, but not compromise too much, and also work united. I think that's extremely important to sort of build an environment where everyone wants to sort of support you and your organization and want to be a member of the organization. I think that's what the strength of the Norwegian system is that we have strong organizations and therefore are able to enter into these kind of negotiations. And of course, it has to do with state funding. I mean, we can't we can't say it's not important because it is, as the publishers are partly funded by the state. So they will have to negotiate with us. And after we had this last year, we got a new government, and one of the Minister for Culture and Equality, one of the first things she started on was a book law, and we hope that we will have the right to negotiations, sort of as a part of that law. We're working for that.
All right, any other questions? We have room for, let's say, 2 more, so don't miss your chance. Yeah? Okay. So in that case, I hope we'll meet here again after the lunch break, and we'll discuss the current situation in the audio-visual field, and see you there.